Every day, somewhere in America, more than 300 innocent men, women, and children become victims of medical malpractice at the hands of incompetent and negligent doctors. Last year, over 98,000 victims were killed by doctors. More than 4 million victims are permanently injured each year. Today, the Insider Exclusive goes behind the headlines with Jerry Myers, one of America's top medical malpractice lawyers, to examine a patient's tragic death caused by an arrogant and negligent surgeon who ignored the patient's medical allergies history documented multiple times in their medical records, and went ahead and administered the drug anyway, killing her. The patient's anesthesiologist knew of the danger but lacked the courage to insist that the surgeon abandon the drug Cefitan in favor of a safer antibiotic. The autopsy definitely concluded that the patient died from an extreme reaction to Cefitan. Jerry Myers' passion is problem solving. He approaches each medical negligence case as a scientist trying to solve a puzzle. For 10 years, Jerry was on the front lines as a Navy medic and a respiratory therapist. He's seen many patients suffer needless injury, and because of that, he is driven to help people who have been harmed by incompetent and negligent doctors. Jerry's goal? To make medicine safer and more accountable. Hi, I'm Steve Murphy, and this is the Insider Exclusive, live from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, at the law firm of Myers, Giuffre, Evans, and Schwartzwalder. It's my great privilege to introduce Jerry Myers to the show. Welcome to the show, Jerry.
Glad to be here.
We took a great interest in producing a show for you, a number of shows for you, primarily because not only are you a lawyer, but you have an extensive background in the medical profession. And that's probably one of the reasons you became a lawyer to begin with. Tell our audience a little bit about not only your firm, but your background in becoming a lawyer, why you became a lawyer.
Well, I was a respiratory therapist in a teaching hospital. I was the senior staff therapist on nights, which meant that I took care of all the ICU patients, the intensive care patients who needed to be on ventilators.
And that was for 7 years, right?
Yes. And during that period of time, and I loved the work. I loved being with patients and helping them. But during that period of time, I saw awful mistakes made. And I tried to often attempt to fix the mistake from inside.
How did you go from being a respiratory therapist? What motivated you to becoming a lawyer?
Well, I realized that as a respiratory therapist, I had no influence over hospital policy. No matter what I said, no matter what evidence I accumulated, they wouldn't listen to me. Moreover, the house staff, the interns and residents who I recruited, were threatened with not getting positions after completion of their residency, and they wouldn't help. And so I came to believe the only way to do it was to just do it myself, and it was a rather arrogant and a fanciful dream for me, but I pursued it. I went to law school. I came back to Pittsburgh insisting I would do only this kind of work, and people laughed at me. There was no such thing. I was the first lawyer in Pennsylvania, trial lawyer, to do only this kind of work. I started to accumulate a medical library. My first budget was $110. I believe I got 10 or 11 books for that. They were leading medical texts. That's all they cost back then. I now have in my library over 1,000 texts, and in addition maintain an archive medical library so that if a doctor says, well, that's not the way my book said it was to be done 5 years ago. Right. I said, really? Oh, so you're using the green edition of this. Oh, I happen to have that. And I just pull it out and cross-examine them.
So nobody can pull the wool over your eyes when we're talking about medical terminology, can they?
No. No, I've spent my whole career devoted to knowing medicine. I read the New England Journal of Medicine every week. Right. I subscribe to 5 other monthly periodicals in medicine, and I actually read them.
Before we get into this case where a surgeon administered the wrong drug, despite the fact there was evidence not to administer it, let's talk about why we can't identify the client and a lot of things about the case, because in the state of Pennsylvania you have a program called MCARE. It's a statute, right?
Yes, the MCARE is an organization created by statute. It was to enable doctors to have ready access to excess insurance coverage, because there was a claim many years ago that it was hard for doctors to get insurance inexpensively.
Yeah.
So MCARE came in, a state agency, and they acted like an insurance company. But years ago, back in the 80s, and at that time they weren't called MCARE, then they were called the CAT Fund, but it's the same organization. They implemented an internal regulation prohibiting any lawyer or any client from revealing the facts of a settlement, the amount of a settlement. And so we were placed in a position, and I think I was the last to give up, placed in a position of trying a case and losing an opportunity, placing our clients at risk, losing an opportunity to solve tremendous economic challenges they faced, in order to maintain the privilege of being able to tell anyone about it. And so there was this loud silence about medical malpractice in Pennsylvania, and that's been true since late 70s, early 80s.
And also possibly getting a doctor off the doctor rolls if they're frequently negligent, right?
Well, there is a patient safety authority that was created as a part of MCARE. And when doctors are involved in medical malpractice claims, they're supposed to be reported to this authority, and this authority is supposed to do an investigation. But the fact of the matter is, except for the use of drugs or the commission of a felony, I'm unaware of any doctor in Pennsylvania who has lost his license simply because he killed someone negligent.
Yeah. Let's talk about this specific case. We'll call your client Betty Doe. Tell us what happened.
Well, Betty had a fairly minor problem. She had had diverticulitis. It's a fairly common ailment, but in her case, it had resulted in her bowel being perforated. They had to treat it by removing a portion of her bowel and exteriorizing her bowel, making a colostomy. This is where people wear bags.
Right.
Well, she had an infection and a breakdown of the area around that, and so her surgeon invited her to come into the hospital to have a debridement, clean it up. It was a one-day procedure. She should have been home the same day. He ordered an antibiotic in order to guard against post-operative infections. And she went to the operating room, someone gave her the antibiotic, and she promptly went into cardiac arrest.
Now, this antibiotic she was allergic to.
Yes, but at the time it wasn't known that she was allergic to it.
Okay, fine. And that was Cetaphan, right?
Cefitan.
Cefitan.
So it's a cephalosporin drug, common. It's in common use.
Right.
And people have allergies to it. Sometimes you don't know you have an allergy. Sometimes you can get a drug,
right,
and have it several times and not have an allergic reaction, and then you have it the fifth time and you have an allergic reaction.
So as a result of this one time, they were well aware that she was allergic to this drug, right?
Dying in front of their face was a pretty dramatic way of becoming aware of it, yes.
Right.
So the anesthesiologist saved her life. And not only, it was like a miracle, because he not only saved her life, but she suffered no sequelae. There was no brain injury, there was no injury of any kind, except that her chest was very sore from the chest compressions that they had to do in order to revive her.
Right. Now, we are going to show, I think there were 7 or 8 different medical records where it was indicated that she was allergic to this drug.
Yes, records beginning in the first admission and records that appeared in a second admission, which we'll discuss.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this second admission.
Well, a month later, she came back in to have the surgery done that couldn't have been done because she died. How inconvenient.
Yeah.
She actually saw her surgeon 2 weeks before the second admission and presented her surgeon with a handwritten note that had been provided her by the anesthesiologist who saved her life during the first admission.
Right. That said she was allergic to.
That's right. When she came into the hospital, and now this is 30 days later, there was, as you'll show, numerous places where her allergy to this drug was noted.
Yes.
And in fact, in one place, it went on to say that she had had a cardiac arrest because of it, and she was still complaining of a sore chest from the CPR they had done.
She even had a wristband like you're wearing right here, correct?
Yes.
Which says it's red.
Allergy.
It says allergy on it.
Right.
It's red because it means danger.
Danger. And in spite of that, and in spite of all the records, and in spite of a promise.
A promise by the anesthesiologist to the patient who had saved her life.
No, this was actually the second anesthesiologist.
Second. But it's still a promise by an anesthesiologist. We will not use Cefitan.
She was crazed. When she came into the hospital the second time, she had a premonition of her death. She was terrified. Few people have had a cardiac arrest and survived. It's a terrifying experience.
Yes.
And now she was coming into a hospital and she was terrified that someone was going to give her the drug. She was so upset that the nurse in the ambulatory care center called the anesthesiologist on her case and asked the anesthesiologist to come down and see if she could quiet her down. The anesthesiologist came down, talked to her, and said, "Betty, we know you're allergic. Don't worry. I promise you, you are not going to receive Cefitan."
What happened?
Well, about 10 minutes later, she's wheeled into the OR, and a nurse anesthetist, not the anesthesiologist she had spoken to, proceeds to prepare her for the surgery once again. And then the anesthesiologist she had spoken to, who had made the promise, comes into the room. "What are you doing?" she says, because she recognized immediately that the kind of syringe being used was the kind you use to give a prophylactic antibiotic. The nurse anesthetist said, "I'm going to give Cefitan to the patient as a prophylaxis." And the anesthesiologist said, "But she's allergic to Cefitan. You can't give her that." But the nurse anesthetist replied, "Dr. W. wants her to have it." And so the anesthesiologist said, "Well, you better not give her too much." And they started to administer it, and she immediately had a cardiac arrest. And we believe that she was, at the time that this occurred, awake. She was laying there on the table, hearing this discussion, this woman who had expressed such terror just moments earlier.
This woman with the red band on.
With a red band on her wrist. And she heard the gun being loaded.
Yeah.
It was like being on a firing, being the victim of a firing squad.
Yeah. In any other context, this would be murder.
Yes, it would be.
This would be murder. And that doctor should be tried for murder. But that's for another day.
Yes.
What was your legal strategy? She died.
Yes.
What was your legal strategy to win this case?
Well, when the husband came to us, he was overwrought. It develops that this day she died happened to have been his 39th wedding anniversary.
And they were high school sweethearts.
They were high school sweethearts. The doctor had not told him much, but he did tell him, well, we gave her a test dose. There is no such thing as a test dose.
I know.
When you have a true allergic reaction to something, the smallest amount of it will produce the same reaction. It's not in any way dose related.
It's like taking a test dose of a poison. There's no test
strychnine.
dose.
I wonder, do you
Are you
test
allergic
dose?
to strychnine?
Are you allergic to strychnine? Here,
Yeah.
just a little bit. Here, go
Yeah.
ahead. No, actually it's worse, because a very, very small dose of strychnine might not kill you.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're really allergic to a drug, any amount of that drug that gets into your blood triggers a cascade of events that will result in your death most of the time. It's very, very hard to save someone once they've had a second cardiac arrest from the same drug.
Part of the evidence for your client was the fact that the medical examiner said that she, in the autopsy, she died of an adverse reaction to this drug, right?
Yes, and we also were able to recruit the anesthesiologist who had saved her life the first time, because ironically, he was in the hallway of the operating room suites when the cardiac arrest was announced. And when he ran into the room and realized it was Betty, he was outraged. And he was willing to talk to us. It was very unusual because his partner was being sued by us.
Yeah. One of the other points that I want to make on this case, not only was the anesthesiologist willing to testify against the surgeon, this did not go to trial, did it?
No, it didn't.
But one of the other points I wanted to make was the hospital pharmacy, another checking place for preventing this drug to get refused initially to give the surgeon the drug to administer because they knew the patient was allergic to it, right?
Sure, it was on their computer.
And the surgeon harassed the pharmacy to get it, correct?
That's right.
So he knew well in advance.
Yeah, he harassed and for no reason. She didn't need the particular antibiotic he wanted to give her. It was only given to prevent a possible infection, and she had already been put on a different antibiotic following the first experience. They could have simply continued it.
A lot of people, you know, deal with doctors every single day. How do you recognize medical malpractice?
Well, if a person has suffered an unusual, unexpected complication, that's not proof that something wrong happened, but it's a reason to ask questions. And if you do not have an explanation that makes sense, and when I say makes sense, I mean in words that you can understand. Any doctor who cannot speak to a patient in words the patient understands should result in a patient getting a different doctor. And what happens in these cases invariably is the doctors and nurses run. They're nowhere to be seen. It's my common experience and that of other malpractice lawyers. You'll have a patient come into the office and you'll say, "And what did the doctor say?" And they say, "Nothing." "Well, didn't you ask?" "Yeah, but he didn't say anything."
Right.
In this case, that's exactly what happened.
One of the reasons, the main reason why we're doing this show is because your law firm has the ability to decipher doctors' lingo.
Yes.
To tell a patient or a client exactly what went wrong because you're knowledgeable. You've got an extensive library, medical library, you've got medical staff and that sort of thing, which is one of the reasons why folks that have problems with doctors or things that have gone wrong should really come to you because you have, you know, you're loaded with both barrels in the sense that you know the legal knowledge, you know the medical knowledge, and you know when doctors have gone bad, let's say, as this doctor did.
Well, this was a bad doctor. Most malpractice does not involve criminal behavior.
Yes.
Most malpractice is someone making a mistake, just as we all might do, pulling out onto the expressway and having someone blare their horn at us because we've cut them off and we didn't mean to. We didn't see them. We looked, but we didn't see. But some of them are much worse. The case that we're discussing was much worse.
Yeah, and sorry to have had that, you know, the client pass away, but I'm glad you were there to help the the surviving husband?
Yes.
I want to thank you very much for being on the show, Jerry. You have offered a lot of information, and I'm sure a lot of people will benefit if they have a problem with their doctor by contacting you.
I hope they do.
Thank you again. Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.